In this video, I want to share with you how you can create some generative performance sequencer in Ableton Live. And you can use it for hardware or also for plugins, which makes it incredibly useful. And it does one thing that I like a lot and was always looking for because I didn't know how to imitate this, which is muting individual notes. So you can basically load in any MIDI sequence here. So here you see my sequence, and it imitates the effect that you get from muting, for example, a lane. And I made the experience that muting individual notes brings up incredibly interesting sequences because you get new rhythms, new relations. And if you, for example, start without anything, so I can take off all notes here, bring all those values to 0. Actually, you can apply some MIDI controller, but I'm going to do it with the mouse for now. You have nothing, and then you slowly bring in those notes. You can add density and slowly reveal the actual sequence. And if you want, you can also apply some chance for the notes. So inside a certain scale, you get also some cool variations. And then at some point, the whole sequence would actually sound like this. And you can also change the scale. So on the left side, I collected some scales. So if you feel like, okay, it sounds cool in minor, that's how I composed the sequence. But how does it sound as like a whole halftone scale sequence? So that's also possible, or maybe in Lydian. And if you bring the chance all the way to 100, you get fully randomized melodies. I'm going to walk you through the whole process of setting up a device like this. It will also teach you a lot about MIDI effects in Ableton and how to actually be creative with MIDI, because it's like some composition tool. And in the end, there's also going to be some download option, which includes all those different scales, so you don't have to actually set them up for yourself. My name is Janis, by the way, in case you're new to this channel, and let's jump right into it. So the basic setup is actually MIDI clips, so you can just insert a MIDI track. Then you can choose any sound. So if you go to the left menu and go to sounds, for example, you can load in anything. I'm using something from my own synth collection, Glass Cinema Pad. So I have some packs also for sounds. If you're interested, I'm going to put the link down below in the description. And the same for the sequence. You can basically use anything, any MIDI sequence you composed. Also here, it's one from my own pack. So there's a sequence pack as well. In case you're interested, it's actually played with my drum technique, having some human touch. I'll speak a little about it later. But again, all links you always find down below in the description. But if you don't have any sequence or don't know what to do, you can also create a new clip and do something really simple. For example, just composing a couple of notes in C and maybe a couple of notes in G, making something really simple. It doesn't have to be overly complicated, or maybe one additional one in E flat or D sharp, so you have some little C minor type melody. In order to find out in what kind of scale you are, you can click the scale icon inside this MIDI edit menu, and now you see it's on minor, so it would actually fit, and you can actually go through the scales. I would always go through the basic ones, which are on top. You don't need to start with Hungarian minor or Lydian augmented. Usually it's going to be in one of those first ones. So if you see I'm going to use major, it doesn't highlight all the notes, so it's not in major. Otherwise, it's also some perfect question you can ask some AI, like you just say, okay, I have C, D sharp, G, G sharp, and okay, again, C. What scale would that be in? And of course, you can also, before you start composing, just choose a scale here, have the highlighted notes, and then just compose something that only uses the highlighted notes. Now, once we found out the scale, we go to the MIDI effect menu on the left side and go to the scale menu, unfold, and look for, in our case, minor, because we just found out, okay, it's a minor scale. We drag it to the track. It needs to be in front of the instrument. And now we can actually see what kind of notes we play. So you always see the pad flash up in yellow once a note gets triggered. And now we can basically duplicate it a couple of times. In our case, we need it 4 times because there are 4 different pitches, actually 5, but it's C in 2 different octaves. So in fact, it's just 4 pitches. And then for all the notes, you actually mute them at one of those scale effects. It might sound a little or look a bit abstract, but actually that's a super fast way of doing this. So for the first effect, we mute the C. For the second, we mute the, in this case, D sharp, or actually it's E flat and harmonically correct. For the third one, we mute the G. And for the fourth one, we mute the G sharp, or actually enharmonically it would be A flat. So now we actually eliminated all the notes and we have nothing. And we get them back once we bypass the scale effect. So if we bypass this one, we only get the Cs. If we bypass this one, we only get the D sharps. And so on. For making this look less intimidating, we can group all those scale effects by selecting all of them and pressing Command G, or you could also right click and select group. And then we create some MIDI effect rack. And here we can map all those bypass icons to macros, which is super useful. So we can right click on the first bypass icon, map to macro 1, do the same for the second one with macro 2, macro 3 and macro 4. And now we can actually control it with those knobs. The only thing that I find confusing is that once it's all the way to the right, we actually take off the note, and once it's to the left, we bypass it so we can hear the note. And I find it more logical that on full amount, it actually plays the note. So we can access the menu by clicking map. And then you need to make sure that this left side menu is actually unfolded. And we need to change the values here. So where it says 64, we need to make it 127. And where it says 64, we need to change it to, where it says 127, we need to change it to 64. And now you can see that once we're on the right side, we actually have all notes. And once we move it to the left side, we take the notes off. And now, since this rack is specifically tailored to the sequence, we can actually add the individual note names. If you press on this first icon or device on, press Command and R or right click and actually rename. You could, for example, just call it C, and the second one would be E flat, the third one G, and the fourth one A flat. However, this is something you need to do for every individual sequence, because as soon as you have some other sequence that has, for example, a D or like a B flat, you need to add those manually. And that's why I prefer to create a rack like the one you saw in the intro that covers the whole scale. So not only the notes I actually have in this particular sequence. So we need to go a few steps back. And for doing that, actually the first one we can keep, but we need to unmap. For now, we'll map them back in a second. Those three scale plugins, because now we need to insert the other notes. For example, we need to have one minor instance that gets rid of the D. So we get rid of this note. Then we have the E flat here. And we also miss the F. So we need to go here and take off the F. Then we see here we take off the G, that's great. Here we take off the A flat, which is also great. And then we add one more where we actually take off the B flat. And then we have the whole scale covered, and we can map those to those first 7 knobs. So the first one is still mapped. Then we map the second one, the third one, the fourth one, the fifth one, the sixth one, and also the 7th one. And now we also have to get rid of those actual note names. I mean, C would still be true, but I prefer to just do it 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, like the notes of the scale, because then you can also later use this rack for different scales, because it can be major, it can be minor, it can be something totally different. So let's just give them numbers. I think that's the easiest way. Of course, you can do whatever feels great to you. And don't forget to again adjust those values. Actually, now we have to do it again because we unmapped once. So I'll quickly do it. So in the end, it needs to look like this. And if we have all of them to the right side, we again hear the full sequence. And if they are all on the left side, we actually have no sequence. And if you're using those buttons just for on and off functions, which is not what we're going to do, because I use some little more refined way that I'm going to share in a second, where you see that you actually work a little with chances by adding the amount. But if it's just on off, you can perfectly use a MIDI controller. So for example, here I have this launch key. It looks like this. And it has this pad mode, so I can basically click on one of those, Command M, MIDI map a pad. And now there's just one pad mapped, so I can just toggle this on and off. So for on and off functions, that's way simpler than having to drag this all the way to the right or left. By the way, in case you enjoy this video and feel like supporting the channel, you can quickly hit the like button, and you're also warmly invited to subscribe because I share lots of tutorials about, for example, Ableton Live and some generative music techniques. And also check out my website because I offer online classes, I offer coaching, so I also created sound packs, as I mentioned, the MIDI pack or the synth sounds. Lots of stuff. You might find something that helps you further on your musical journey, so just a warm invitation to check it out. For making those knobs a little more powerful than just using some on-off toggle function, we can use some other extremely amazing MIDI effect, which is called expression control. And this is basically like some, or I mostly use it as some randomizer. So this is the one, you drag it in front of this MIDI rack. And it might look a bit intimidating, but I basically always use random with this one. So you can choose all of those to random and then map this random value. So with any trigger, it will actually receive a or create a random value based on the triggers from the sequence, which is perfect for what we want to do. And we can map it to the first note, which means that now once we play the sequence, it will actually give us some chance. So sometimes the note appears, sometimes not, without us having to turn the knob or do something. And now you can control this knob with minimum, maximum, and also the amount. I think the amount is basically the intensity of how much it jumps around. As you can see, here it's kind of static. And then if you bring the minimum up, for example, you're at the full amount, or if you have both at 0, you're at nothing. So we need to find some kind of the interplay between those two buttons so it moves around. But we still want to control it, which is why we need some new rack. And just bear with me, it might look a bit complicated, but we basically select the expression control and the MIDI effect rack we have by pressing Shift. So we select both and group them again, Command G. So we create a new MIDI rack. I absolutely love those racks because you can always create new racks. But if you see this for the first time, you might think like, wow, why, just why? But the reason is that now we have some new set of macros here on the left side that we can use for controlling those parameters. And as I mentioned, you have to find the interplay. And first you need to map minimum and maximum to the same knob. So in this case, to macro 1, so you can see we control it now, but we don't want to have it on the same amounts and or actually same values. The amount, I remember I switched to 60 because this was the most musical setting for me, so it doesn't jump around too much, but there's some jumping. And if you press map, you can see actually again the values here, and you can make some refinements. So for example, you can say, okay, the max value is at minimum at 40%, and also the minimum value. And that's actually what I came up with, that 40% is great for them as the bottom amount. And for the maximum, actually the minimum can be at 100%, but for the maximum, I think I was at 64. And now this knob has the perfect balance between having no notes if it's all the way to the left, so we can actually check. So you see both are on the same value, so there's no movement, but as soon as we open it, we already get a few notes. And here we get all of them. And I still felt like we were too soon in the area where we had too many notes, so we can refine it by reducing the maximum amount to, for example, maybe 54. So let's see how it evolves now. So no notes. Now we're at the area where we get them sometimes. I think that's a good setting. Here you have all of them. So it makes the knob a bit more musical. Maybe you don't need it, maybe you're fine with the toggling, but this is something that I enjoy a lot because it gives you the chance to say, okay, I always want to have them, I never want to have them, but I also want to have this more random based sound that can be super inspiring and musical because it just adds some variation to your sequence. And now it's some very tedious work because you need to select random for all those 6 sections here and basically map them to the notes. So this one you map to 2, to 3, and so on. And then you need to also create a new expression control because it only has 6 modulations. So you need to add a second one that you only need actually, or of which you only need the first one for also editing macro 7. And then you do the same thing again for all of those where you access this mapping menu. Or actually first you would apply minimum and maximum to the macros and then go to the map menu and change the values for all those knobs as we did here. And if you feel like, okay, that's a lot of work, again, there's a download option in the end, so you can also skip this part for now and see what happens next so you understand it. Or yeah, you just need to do this work here, but in my opinion, it's really worth it. Once you've done all the mapping, it should look like this. And the next thing I want to share with you, actually the final missing piece. Actually, there are 2 things missing, which is setting up different scales. But first, also setting up the chance for additional notes, which is some extremely musical feature. I'm going to make them a bit smaller for now, because we have 1 macro left, as you can see. Here you would actually, let's quickly name them so it's more clear. And again, I just use the numbers here for the notes. And again, we have 1 left, which we can use for the chance. And for doing this, we need 1 additional scale plugin first, because we need to make sure that the variations are in tune. Because if you only use a random effect, it will choose chromatic variations and it can quickly sound quite messy. So let's first pick a minor scale and put it in front of all those other scales. And here we don't do anything. We just want to have the minor scale the way it is. And now we can use the random effect and put it in front. And now we can see that actually we want to have all notes. Let's change this for now. Now we can see that once I increase the chance, we get variations inside the scale, which is actually super cool. But if I turn off the minor, it will sound chromatic. Sometimes it's also great, actually. It sounds actually better than I expected now. But if you want to control the scale, you need to put it here. And I actually like to use 2 random instances. So this one is just for the tone variety. And another random trick I really like is to switch the scale to 12, which means we get octaves, and the choice is to 2. So if we use this one, we occasionally, let's take this off for now, get some octaves, which makes the sequence sound so more lively, in my opinion, just every now and then to get some higher octave. It's something I absolutely enjoy. Like this. And then you get those combinations of both. And now we can simply map it to the last remaining macro by right-clicking and mapping it to macro 8, this one. So both of them. But I like to refine it a little because if the second chance goes to 100%, we basically always have like the higher octave. So once you click on map, you can refine it again. And in this case, the first one is great because that means with 100% you get completely randomized melodies, which I think you might enjoy sometimes. But for the octaves, I set the maximum to 50%. So at the highest setting, we get basically a 50% chance for having the octave, but not a 100% chance. You can also refine it based on what you want here. And now we need to map the chance once more because this is just the internal rec. So, wow, here are so many options. We map it to macro 8 again, and now we can actually make or close this MIDI rack and focus on only our main rack, which is this one. And change also colors if you want, because I feel like colors make such a big difference. Whatever you want here, you can basically change them and just make a quick setting. And that's basically the core device without the scale option, which I'll get to in a second. But just to show you some creative things you can do with it, you can randomize those parameters. So you get different variations of your sequence. And I just always absolutely love those randomized functions. Let's actually do a couple of them. So that's the full sequence. And now for the different scales, it's again a little bit of work. And if you feel like I don't want to do it, it's was already quite some stuff to learn. Again, there's some download option where for just a few euros, dollars, whatever, you can get the device with all the scales that you can actually see here. But I also want to show you how you can do it yourself, maybe also with some of your own scales, which is totally possible. So you need to go again into our first rack. It looks really messy at this point, I'm sorry. And here, this is basically our first lane, and I would call it minor. Now what you can do is you can make a second lane by pressing Command D and basically call the second one, for example, major. And now what you have to do is that you can leave the random instances, they are fine, but you need to replace all the scale plugins with the actual scale you want to use. So here, instead of minor, you need to use major. So you go to scale, and you replace the first one with the major scale and also the other ones. So you need to replace them, all of them, then again do the node process. As I've shown you with the minor, it's exactly the same. Map them again. And once it's all mapped, you need to create a chain. So here you can click on chain. Now you see they're both actually on top of each other, which means we actually create two MIDI nodes at the same time, which we don't want. You can move the second one a little to the side and make them a little longer so you see them better. And now this here is the chain selector, which means once you're on the minor mode, you will actually get the minor scale. Once you're on the major mode, you get a different scale. Now I didn't set up all of those here because I did the work already for the other example, but that's actually how you can do it. And then you need to control this chain selector, which you can actually map by right-clicking and map to macro 9, which I like to keep invisible, because if I click plus now, we have the chain selector here, so we move this, and here you can imagine doing this for all sorts of scales you want to choose. And then at a certain point, you can also move something to the other side, right-click on it and say distribute ranges equally for all of your scales. So in the end, it actually looks like, how does it look here? Like this. So it's just visually a little more appealing than the first setting. And this chain selector, you have to, of course, map then to the first rack. It's a lot of mapping, but I hope you realize a little how it works, and it helps you to also create your own devices maybe at some point. And now, we're lucky we can close this again, because opening this MIDI effect rack with the scales always looks really intimidating, I feel. And so here we have the chain selector on macro 9, and then we can create some macro presets. Or actually, we need to open the other one once more for seeing where we are. Because here you can click on new, call it minor. Then you have to make sure that the chain selector is on minor, and then you store this preset, and you do the same for, in this case, major. You move the chain selector, store it, and that's basically how it works. And now you can see that once I go to minor, it moves here, and at major, it moves here. And that's how it works for all the scales. And now the thing is with the macro presets that you always store all settings. So if you want to have this just for the scale, but not for the settings you have for the individual nodes, you can right-click on all of them and say, exclude macro from variations. And I usually do this. So the control on the left side is only for the scale, and once I select a new scale, I don't mess with the settings I actually changed. And also for the chance, it's actually good to do that. So now I can change between them. And if I make, for example, a change here, it doesn't apply it to the next preset. It only changes the chain selector. And I like to make it invisible because we actually don't need to see it. It looks more pleasing this way. And we just need to know on the left side that here is minor, major, or whatever scales you want to use. So here you can see it's Dorian, Phrygian, harmonic minor, melodic minor, whole tone, half tone, messiaen, some funky stuff. And yeah, as I mentioned, you can check out the download link. It's, if you like this video, also a sweet little way of saying thank you, and you save yourself some work by doing all the scale stuff yourself. Also, it's really, it happens quickly that you make some mistake and then you have to do lots of things again. So I think it's cool to have this as a device stored. And still, as you saw in the beginning, you can also do the individual part, making it per sequence. But I think that's even more work. And by doing this, you can also add some variation to a sequence of just 3 notes, because if it's in minor, you can add some note variations with the chance knob, adding some 4th or 5th note. So that's also a very musical tool. Otherwise, as I mentioned, there's a super cool sequencing technique based on a drumming technique, and which is also what inspired me to make some sequence collection called Human Arpeggiator. And there's a video where I speak about it, and you're warmly invited to watch it. I'm going to link it here. And if you're interested in building some more generative instruments, you should also check out this video. And apart from that, I just wish you lots of inspiration with whatever it is that you create, and hope to see you soon again at this channel. Bye.